We'll kick off all. I suppose first of all to say hello to all. My name is Paidi Oreilly, and I suppose I've got the role of host today. I'm actually dialing in from Cork City here. I know we had another event last Friday, and I was bragging how nice the weather was last Friday. The sun was shining. Unfortunately, it's a completely different situation today. It's wet, windy, dreary. Hopefully the weather is a bit better wherever you're dialing in from. And I know we've people dialing in from Cork, all around Ireland. We've people from Europe, and actually one or two from the States as well. So depending where you are, good morning, good afternoon. And I suppose this event for me, it's I suppose I'd compare it to being like the proverbial little boy in the sweet shop. How better does it get? Despite the weather, we're talking about digital transformation. We got four excellent guests who are really experts in their own areas. And we have the next 90 minutes for discussing all things digital transformation, and in particular what comes next with digital transformation. We have a very nice crowd. We're already creepy up around the 100 mark, and I know there's more signed up as well. So what we'll do is we'll go, even though it's a webinar, we'll go for maybe an interactive type approach. It is based on maybe questions and answers. We'll ask the guests, but also if you feel like asking a question, please enter it in the chat, and what we'll try and do is pick it up off the chat as we move along. This is the first in a series of events, all to do with digital transformation, all organised by the Digital Transformation Lab at UCC with the support of Cork University Business School. And really that group, the Digital Transformation Lab group, is really a peer learning network where individuals, whether they be professionals, academics, researchers, or whoever has an interest in digital transformation, come together to share insights around best practices, next practices. Indeed, in some cases, it's the sharing of things that went wrong is very valuable. And what we're really trying to do is move the needle on digital transformation, that it becomes more than a buzzword, or what do we call it, the organizational buzzword bingo type thing in organizations, where people use the word digital transformation and really, I suppose, we lack insight into what it is and how we should do it. So I know, I suppose this series is about bringing experts into the room who have very kindly, I suppose, offered to share their experiences. These are people that have walked the walk and are willing to talk to us about that walk. So we're very excited about it. And as I say, we are supported by the Cork University Business School. And I'm delighted that we have Professor Eleanor Doyle here today to kickstart this first in a series. So I'd invite Eleanor, hopefully she's still with us in the room, to maybe say a few words to us before we kick off.
Sure, Paidi. Thanks a million. This is Eleanor Doyle here, so it's good to have everyone at the session. I'm Vice Dean of the Cork University Business School, and on behalf of the Business School, I wanted to thank everyone for tuning in for today's session on digital transformation, what's next. Now, I promise my few comments will be very brief. I'm as eager as everyone else to hear from our guests, and I'd like to offer the warmest of welcomes to Clare Dillon, Julianne Coughlan, Antonio Santos, and Rob ODonohue. We're extremely grateful for you to spend this time with us this afternoon. I think we're here because we all agree that the theme of digital transformation is really a substantial one, and it is really, really challenging. I Googled it a while ago. I got over 500,000 responses there. It is one of these buzzwords, but it's important for us to treat it seriously in terms of what we do, how we do it, and how we contribute in terms of business, both on the education and the practice side. So apart from the specifics that I'm looking forward to hearing from across our panel of guests, I know as well in terms of the learning and teaching space, digital transformation is huge. Well, among other things, it demands, in my view anyway, that we develop and appreciate, cross-disciplinary capacities. And they all point to the breaking down of silos. And I'm not convinced that there's enough of those sorts of conversations going on either inside or outside business So this digital transformation lab, I think, is really focused on a really interesting area. So the facilitator who introduced himself there to us is Paidi Oreilly, Dr. Paidi Oreilly. You might have met him through his work on the global lecturing panel at the Irish Management Institute, or through his lectures here at the Business School in the Department of Business Information Systems. You might know him through his work at the Infant SFI Research Centre, or through his over 20 years at this stage project experience on innovation and research. Suffice to say, I think we're in good hands for the next 90 minutes. And I think Paidi are ably helped also by Jeremy Hayes and Tony Moroney. So everyone is really welcome here today. Final word of thanks just to those behind the scenes people without whom these sessions would never be possible. So thanks to Nicola and Michael in particular, and to everyone else who's been involved. So Paidi, handing over to you now to guide the session. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Eleanor. And it's fantastic to be doing this, I suppose, through the likes of the Cork University Business School, through that network, and I suppose grabbing out into the into industry. A lot of goodwill there about maybe collaborating between best practice, research, and also practice in general. So it's fantastic, and that's really what this event today is about as well. It's about really maybe exploring some of the current and future trends when it comes to digital transformation. It's not really about COVID, even though COVID is a massive disruptor and probably one of the biggest catalysts when it comes to digital transformation. But I suppose what we're trying to do in today's event is move beyond COVID, which was crisis management, beyond the coping with COVID, and to see what's over the next hill. Now, we were just talking even before we started today that COVID itself might be over the next hill as well, but really the focus here is about, I suppose, getting organizations now to start thinking beyond crisis management, coping, to what it does next. We got fantastic, I suppose, speakers today. I'm not going to introduce them because I don't think I'll do justice. I know we'll share maybe the bios through the chat, and we can see it through on the screen here. So what I'm going to do is come out of share mode, if I can here. Sorry. And what we'll do is I'll just ask each of our speakers maybe to give us a few sentences, maybe highlight one or two of the main points about maybe your career that you think is would be of most interest to our audience today, and particularly about the topic. So I can see you, Claire, to my right here on the screen. So you're fortunate that I'll let you go first. Yeah.
Thank you. So hello everyone, I'm delighted to be here too. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. As you can see in the chat there, I suppose my background has been, excuse me, up until about maybe 2.5 years ago, I was part of the Microsoft Ireland leadership team, and I headed up their developer evangelism organization. So as part of that group, we were always involved with helping organizations adopt the latest Microsoft technologies. And I suppose since I left there, I have what's probably been called a portfolio career. Since then, I'm now in the middle of a portfolio career. So right now I'm involved in a startup called Animus Labs, which is looking at complexity in the context of enterprise sales for tech solutions companies. But I also work with a developer organization. I'm involved in a developer organization called Inner Source Commons, and that's looking at best practice methodologies for development organizations. Interestingly, in order to break down silos, I was interested to hear Eleanor talk about that cross-disciplinary thing. So Inner Source is all about using open source methodologies behind firewalls to help developers break down silos and do collaboration and things like that.
Yeah, very good, Claire. Julianne, you're next on my list there.
Hi everyone, and thanks Paidi for inviting me here today as well. So my name is Julianne Coughlan. I work in Cork County Council and Corporate Services, and I suppose I'm in the council since 2003, but the last few years have really been about participating in a really driven transformation agenda across the organisation, digital being part of that. So I lead a team in the council called Service Republic, and we're really looking at ways of transforming services across the organisation using service design, I suppose, is our toolkit really, and it's about transformation in the sense of not just how we deliver services, but really how we become more people-centred as an organisation. So digital is definitely part of that, and I'm just interested in this conversation myself today because I think From our point of view, digital was where we started, and I think it's really starting to evolve into something much more substantial in the council. So that's basically where I'm at. So looking forward
Thanks,
to today.
Julianne. Yeah, and Antonio.
Thank you, Paddy, for the invite, and it's really nice to have this conversation here today. I moved to Cork to work for Siemens in 2006, and from that evolved to Atos in 2011. And at the time we started to work on a project called Zero Email, how to remove email from the workplace and start working, building communities. And that's something that I do at work, is trying to build internal communities, trying to take the best of the knowledge of our employees, organizing them, creating different expert groups to try to maximize corporate intelligence. At the same time, put a lot of effort for that type of intelligence to reflect outside. So we encourage everyone to express, to talk about technology outside work. And we encourage our employees also to build communities externally on LinkedIn, on Twitter, in order to improve the communication level and create awareness about what we do. Besides that, I run workshops at CXO level, also in communication. And officially within Atos, I'm part of the diversity and inclusion team, where we're trying to find ways not to leave people behind. We support other organizations to improve the workplace for people with disabilities, trying to include all abilities, and we walk the talk ourselves by applying that. So we use our experience to help others on that journey.
So I love the term walk the talk, you know, and I think it's so appropriate. Rob, you're a man that has been shifting positions or roles recently.
Yes, thanks, Paidi. Hi, everybody. So Rob ODonohue. To Paddy's comment, I just recently started with Gartner as a Senior Director Analyst, and very much a role that I've been really looking forward to taking on for a number of years. It's focused on leadership, culture, people, and diversity and inclusion. So where my angle maybe to this whole conversation will be looking less about maybe the technology, but certainly more about those four pillars, and how people can thrive in new technical world that we're living in. Prior to starting with Gartner, I've been 20 years in the IT industry. Very small number of those years were technical. The majority were much more in the areas of people management, project management, ran some PMOs, strategy, and talent and leadership development really is where the kind of sweet spot is. Do a lot of coaching in that space over the last number of years as well. And then outside the day job, I've been trying to further develop my own personal skills and help others grow a little bit as well through some of the podcast content that I put out on a regular enough basis. So yeah, all about trying to help others improve and grow and develop.
Yeah, good man, Rob. So I always think that maybe events like this and conversations like this should start with us trying to define or describe what we mean by digital transformation, because I think the way we manage it in organizations will change and differ depending on what we see it as. So I just want to maybe shoot around again. So we're not looking for maybe a hard academic definition here, but just maybe a feel for the way maybe you or your organization really see what digital transformation is. So very unfair, Claire, I'm going to come to you again first. You've less time. I will mix it up eventually, don't worry.
Well, so I suppose for me, it's more about the transformation than the digital. So it's about changing how we do things, helped by digital technologies, and hopefully it's improving how we do things helped by digital technologies, but not always, I would say.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Claire, because I suppose heard you speak before, and so obviously in the Microsoft days you were that technology evangelist. I've also heard you more recently talk about that actually it's more about people than technology.
That's right, which is why I focus now on the transformation. I suppose, I spent so many years helping people understand what the technology could do, and I spent so many years seeing pilot projects fail, like go into what we'd call pilot purgatory, where they go in and never come out, and you'd be kind of thinking, why? because they're technically brilliant. Like, they do everything they said they would do on the tin. But it turns out, I think, that an awful lot of digital transformation projects fail because the people aren't ready for them. So it's the competencies of the organization and the structures within the organization that don't allow the transformation to happen. And the digital bit can be as beautiful and technical as you'd like, but it won't work if the people aren't ready for it. So since I've left Microsoft, actually, I've been exploring a little bit more about what helps organizations from that cultural perspective. And for me, that's the key to successful digital transformation.
And Claire, was there a sort of a road to Damascus moment where, or was it something that happened gradually?
Well, there were a lot of kind of small cuts, right? That you kind of go, ooh, why isn't it happening? Why isn't it happening? And then you suddenly, get that kind of realization, hold on, there's a trend here. And I suppose then for me, it was seeing, like, within Microsoft, we had obviously gone through a big transformation in terms of moving from a software business to a services business. And that involved a significant amount of change in terms of what people did, how they did it. And that's what it was. So even though we were telling the story about how technology was helping us on that journey, all the challenges we were dealing with at a leadership team level was around how people worked, how they worked with each other. And there were anything that was blocking us were typically cultural or behavioral blockers, not in any respect technical blockers. I mean, we had the resources of the biggest the biggest software company in the world in terms of technical resources, but that wasn't what blocked us where blockers happened. It was simply behavioral stuff, and that was what slowed people down. And the corollary of that is, or the opposite of that is when you focused on the behavioral stuff, things worked much quicker and much smoother. So it wasn't about technical training or, how to use the tools. It was, often more about why you were using them in a particular way or why you should use them in a particular way, and getting down to behavioral nuggets of insights that really change people's behavior.
Yeah, very interesting. Antonio, if I come to you, because again, maybe you share some of that background in large company, global company. For you and maybe Atos, what's digital transformation?
No, I was looking and listening to Claire, and sometimes we have executives signing big contracts, trying to find their organization to move forward. And then at the end of the day, when they want to talk between themselves, they use WhatsApp, and they end up not using the corporate solutions that they bought from a vendor. So for us, it's try to identify why they do this and how can we improve user experience for this not to happen. So it's also about trying to find ways where you're able to bring together people from different expertise and backgrounds in order to help to make the decisions. And now my daughter decided to come in, like she always does. So one of my focus is it's particularly important for us to at the enterprise level to listen what our customers are saying. And when I'm talking about customers, I'm talking about the employees of that customer, because we want to maximize user adoption and want to make sure that we deploy things that people use. Because sometimes you can have the most experienced solutions in the market and nobody cares that they are there. And sometimes if you do a good work in terms of culture and change, you can have people using tools that are not that expensive, but in the end they work and people use them. So that's one of our focus is around this type of topics, because different customers have different budgets, but at the end they all have the aim to succeed in collaboration and making the best of their workforces.
Yeah, so it's interesting, I suppose, to know in terms of Claire and Antonio, it's very much about, the internal transformation. Maybe it's the introduction of new software, new tools, new approaches internally. So Julianne, I suppose you're in a very different environment. Some would say digital transformation tends to be very agile, or you need to be very agile. Some would say that's when you talk about maybe, in particular, government bodies or local authorities, and the word flexibility, it can seem like an oxymoron.
That's very true, but I suppose maybe the advantage that we have over the private sector to some degree is that in being public servants, I mean, we've certainly discovered this in our transformation journey over the last while, that sense of public service is actually within a lot of our employees. I'm not saying there aren't challenges in different areas, but there is this innate understanding that we are there for the good of the public. It's not really about the bottom line. It's not about what we can squeeze out of you know, a service for profit or anything like that. It's a totally different motivation in a way. And I suppose the transformation that we've been trying to undertake has been about really bringing that sense of public service to the centre, and actually in a very real way allowing people to be part of that. So exactly as Claire was saying, it's not really been about technology, although for us digitisation of services certainly was something that nudged us very nicely along the road of transformation. It kind of became, I've said this before at a couple of events, it's been like a little bit of a Trojan horse for us, in that we digitised services, and through the digitisation we showed people what the change could be in a very kind of a real way. You know, there was an actual product at the end of it, and if we hadn't built on that, then we wouldn't have had any transformation. But I guess digitisation was like the catalyst. After that, then once people became accustomed to the change, interested in making change, we looked at ways that we could actually transform the services by bringing that whole service design approach into the way that we worked. So transformation, in my opinion, is something that's kind of systemic and sustained, and it's more about evolution nearly than it is about change. It's about, you know, really improving, adapting, even surviving. It's so necessary across all sectors these days. So I think yeah, digitisation has been a means to an end, but absolutely not the end for us.
Mm-hmm. And Rob?
Yeah, I would have to echo a lot of what the others are saying. That sounds cliched a little bit, but it plays nicely into, I guess, the work that I've been hired to do for Gartner. And just, I suppose, anecdotally, that team in Gartner that I've started to work for has grown massively over the last few years, because the focus is now more around leadership, culture, people, and obviously diversity and inclusion is growing as well. The technology seems to be rolled out at a rapid pace. It's how you use the technology, why you use it, and getting buy-in to use it. And a lot of the time, I think from a lot of the research that seems to be out there, if you're pushing stuff out without explaining the value that it can bring, then there's potential resistance. And that kind of gets to the cultural element, that when culture is pushed top down, there's no buy-in at the bottom level, right? So you need to kind of get the purpose, the mission, the vision of not only the individual teams, but at the entire organizational level, and the core values that organizations have connected all the way through this golden thread idea, so that everybody's bought into it. Everybody then will enable and empower the transition that is happening. But transition or transformation equals change, and at the core, people have to adopt the change, have to go along with the change, and I think that's really what it's all about.
Yeah, and I think it's very interesting at the moment. There's maybe a bit of discussion in this space about what exactly are we trying to transform. And I think the answers have been interesting, because a lot of the focus was on transforming the internal operations. But I know maybe traditionally the likes of maybe even Rob is maybe associated with Dell before. The Dell definition was to transform the customer experience. So when we talk about people, and Claire mentioned people, and I think we all mentioned maybe people, who exactly are we trying to transform? Is it the employee? Is it the processes? Is it the customer experience? So maybe over to you again, Claire.
Well, I suppose it was an interesting conversation, because and it probably still is the case that everyone has a different definition of digital transformation, as it were. I remember back in the day, well, certainly Microsoft's version kind of encompassed four different things. It was all of what you mentioned before. It was like internal operations, employee engagement with each other, so collaboration around employees and partners, actually. And I think the idea of opening up and breaking down silos, not just within organizations, but also to allow for cross organizational or cross the boundaries of companies is an important one, say, with partners. And then the customer experience. And then this idea of new kind of invention or new innovation, where you're doing something that it's not optimizing anything, it's doing something that's brand new and inventive. And that would have been a kind of a fourth area that they would have talked about in the context of digital transformation. I think it's all of the above. Like, you know, sometimes it's efficiencies, sometimes it's doing something new, sometimes it's just experimenting and even just, you know, offering different smaller services or larger services or inventing brand new things. So it can mean so many different things for people. And I'd like to go back to what Rob was saying about the engagement with the people that it impacts. I mean, you know, I think the biggest challenge here is you can define all this. You can have this grand strategy plan from the top down. But if you're not actually talking to people as to what they want to transform, then you're not actually kind of going to necessarily get their buy-in. So I think one of the things that's missing in this whole big definition even of all the opportunity space is when you're thinking about where to start, I think it is important to engage the people who are going to be impacted by the transformation and ask them what they think the future should look like, because sometimes that's missing and then you miss a whole lot of context. And you know, for Julianne in the context, like even for, you know, and I think that's happening now, where people are engaging more with citizens in the context of public services or with employees or partners in the context of organizations. But it's important to engage people to understand what they see the future as.
And I think there is, I love the term the Trojan horse, because I think there is some anecdotal evidence over the last few months in particular that digital transformation is seen as the Trojan horse for bringing process and efficiency in. And we're maybe losing sight of what Rob talked about, and maybe Julianne, the person, the person in I suppose here in Cork that's maybe requiring a service, or maybe some cases maybe someone that buys a product from a company. So, Antonia, is there a danger that with COVID and the race to digital transformation that we're losing sight of the end user, the person that's at the end of the chain?
I'm afraid, you know, with this, many CIOs had an agenda for transformation that sometimes they were delaying for many different reasons. Sometimes they were afraid to change. Sometimes they were not that confident that they were able to execute. And sometimes they were resisting to things like remote work, saying, you know, with a lot of bias against it. And suddenly they were asked to jump into remote work. And now everyone needs to work remotely. And I'm afraid that, you know, if you don't do a good job to support the employees into this journey, when we go back to be able to return to the offices as usual, people might start to, you know, we could work from home, but it didn't work that well. So it's really important to be able to support your employees when you were on this rush to go to remote work, as an example. Is really, in this particular case, I think it's particularly important to follow up your employees in whatever activities they are doing. People are going to feel isolated at home. They feel that they are not being productive. So it's particularly important to have conversations about productivity, finding, you know, passing the message that, you know, you are not remote, you are not working from home. You are in a pandemic, working from home, trying to work. So it's particularly important to open the organization to this type of conversations, and also have conversations about mental health, about isolation, and keep the different channels open so everyone can raise their hand and say, I need help here, I need help there, so that employees feel that if they need help, the help is there in order to support them. Because if you don't do this, if you just expect everyone to suddenly to work from home, independent from living in a big house or in a small apartment, you are going to fail after, and everyone is going to feel disappointed. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I suppose going over to Rob, being the devil's advocate here, I think maybe one of the dangers of COVID is that we're going to get better, but at doing the wrong things. You know, that we're all focused on people working from home, and that is very important. But who's looking at what's going to be over the next hill, you know, in terms of the very strategy of the business? For me, they're operational concerns, but who's looking at the strategy, digital transformation as a strategy, about the positioning of these organizations, the things we should be doing, not getting better at the things, you know, maybe the wrong things or the things that are just must-haves, but actually figuring out where do we need to go next.
Yeah, so I'll probably answer that in a roundabout way. And a lot of, even in the 3 weeks I've been with Gartner, I feel like I've learned probably what I've learned in the previous three years. And a lot of the questions coming in are around COVID, remote work, getting back to work. And I think the data is out there. I'm not sharing anything that's not known, but the statistics show people are more productive working from home. That was always kind of thrown out there, but now in the last 3 months of an experiment, it's proven, right? So I think some of the Gartner papers that we were putting out were predicting a much more move to remote work over the next 7 to 10 years, and it's happened in effectively 2 weeks. And for the most part, the technology actually is solid, and you know, the bandwidth concerns are, you know, 99% of the time that's fine. It's certainly the impact on how people work. And I think what people, when the leaders start looking at and maybe partnering closely with HR, to your question, Paidi, is a strategy that needs to be put in place. Not everybody will want to go back to work now, because they've realized it can be more productive to have a better quality of life, work-life balance at home. Some people will absolutely want to go back to work, and there has to be thought through the actual challenges or concerns about going back to work as well, because, you know, 3 months ago when somebody sneezed beside you at work, you didn't think you were going to get COVID-19, but now when you go back, you're going to be more concerned. So there's a whole focus that needs to be done on people going back, but also people staying at home. Some of the challenges I think that maybe that mightn't be thought through when you're working from home right now, you're, you know, probably putting in more effort than ever before. Not only are you missing those hallway conversations, the water cool conversations that were, you know, mentioned, that are very important for that sense of connectivity. We're social creatures, you know, sense of tribe and belonging. The other things that you might miss out on are when you're not going to have that elevator conversation with your boss, when you're talking about career development, when you're talking about potentially getting to the next level. Those sort of sidebar conversations go away unless the management and the leadership are very proactive in making time for them to happen in an ongoing basis, so that people aren't just forgotten, because some might be very good at networking and playing that game when they're in the office, but when they're at home, they can, you know, lose that potential opportunity. So there's a lot of thinking that needs to happen, and it's across the C-level, not just CIOs, closely with HR, and, you know, across the organization that needs to kind of plot that out. I think this crisis, which is just one of probably many more that will come down the road, has just accelerated so many of those conversations. And I think, you know, that's going to be a big talking point for the next while.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, because even in our own thoughts, we're going back into crisis management mode. And for me, maybe a lot of things we're talking about here, the operations side, would be competitive necessities. You know, you have to have people working safely. You have to have them working efficiently. They have to have a sense of reward from work. But what's around the next corner, guys? You know, and I see there's a great comment here from Peter saying, you know, if you just digitize a poor process or service, it's just still a poor process. So where is this future competitive advantage? And I know maybe, Julianne, you've been doing incredible work, you know, in terms of probably doing something that a lot of local authorities really spoke about for a while, but really struggled with. Where for you is the competitive advantage from digital transformation going forward, the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think it probably comes back a little bit to Claire's comment earlier too, like setting the vision initially of why it is you want to do whatever transformation it is you're looking to do is so important. And if you don't start with that, you're kind of on a hiding to nothing, really. And I mean, for us, it was even about taking a step back further than that and saying, well, what actually, we started with values, and that's probably something that maybe a lot of organizations now more than ever, given the recent emergency and everything, need to rethink. There's a real realignment of people's values after this emergency. I think if we've learned anything, I think we can start learning that. And as organisations, we need to think about what are the values that we hold, what values, then break that down into what are the values that we want for our citizens or our customers, and what's important, what is important for them, what are their values. And we did that for our customers, we did that for our staff, and we kind of form a vision then around really empowering the people of, for us as a local authority, the people of the county of Cork, to actually, you know, reach their potential and develop all of the opportunities that they have as people living and working in Cork, whether that's businesses, citizens, communities, like all of those different perspectives are all valid. And then also staff. So you do absolutely have to turn that reflection in on your own organisation as well. From those values, you start to design your vision. So it's really about even taking a step back from that. So in terms of competitive advantage, I think there's a huge lesson for any organisation to learn by adopting that sort of approach, because all we know after, I think, the last few months too, is that whatever we think the future is going to be like, it's probably going to be quite different to that as well. So finding also a way in that of adapting and becoming kind of responsive, becoming more agile, you know, because the environment might change, the markets might change, lots of those things might change, but the chances are the values, the fundamental values people have, the fundamental values that your citizens, your customers, business, communities have, are probably quite you know, resilient. And those are the things maybe to start looking at. We generally don't tend to build vision and strategy around those things, but that is something that we're starting to do as a local authority. And I just think there's probably a good lesson there for a lot of other sectors as well.
Yeah, so it's interesting because you're talking about maybe a bit about the how we can do that. So so is that, I presume it's about going out, engaging with these people more directly, you know, trying to figure out what it is they need. Then I suppose at some stage there is a trade-off, though. We can't do everything for everyone. There's also a cost to budget to the likes of a Cork County Council. So how do you make those decisions? You know, who decides what's most important? Is that value more important than the budget? And how is that trade-off?
Nothing's more important than the budget. Nothing's ever more important than the budget. But I suppose what you're trying to do is strike a balance between being a local authority that provides services for customers, but also finding ways to, that word partnership, I kind of found very interesting earlier as well, finding ways to partner with local resources, assets that are out there already in our local areas, and supporting and enabling people to help themselves as well. I think the days of us just being, from a local authority point of view, a public sector organisation that will just go out there and give people things or do things for people, those days really are gone. We have to think about how we can work with people to develop a county and a community, a business environment, all of those things that are desirable for growth and opportunity. And we can't do all of that. We can certainly try to create the environment or the kind of processes and the methods and you know, things that allow that to happen. So it's really not just about what we can do. So it's thinking beyond budgets as well. It's thinking about how you can empower people to help themselves. And that's really an important thing as a local authority and public service for us to do.
Yeah, Antonio, I distinctly recall we were at a service design network event not too long ago, maybe a few years ago now, and the concept of budgets and accessibility came up. And I remember you asked a question that day, I think it was to Kat McCauley, saying, what is the return on investment on accessibility? I think you knew what answer she was going to give you, but can you tell us a bit about it? Because we're hearing about budgets here.
Okay. Because first of all, I know Kat for a couple of years already, because we do, myself and my colleague Neil Milliken, we do a lot of work on accessibility, and we facilitate conversations.
Actually, Antonio, do you want to just tell us who Kat is, you know, just for the audience?
She's the head of service design at the Government of Scotland, That's where she worked, and she was trying to improve. She was always very keen in improving the accessibility side of government services, because it's important to know a consumer and a citizen are two different angles of approach. When you are providing services in government, everyone needs to access them. You can't just, otherwise you are creating a barrier to access to services from a part of a population. So it's particularly important that you consider the needs of everyone. But over the last 5 years, myself and my colleague Neil Milliken and Deborah Rue, we have been facilitating conversations on this topic online through Twitter chats and podcasts, with the idea of trying to understand the industry and what everyone wants to do, and trying to know all the experts in this field. And in terms of value of accessibility, it's clear that when you are able to implement solutions that are inclusive, you are opening opportunities if you are selling in terms of the market, because you are untapping a value of a number of consumers that are often ignored. And in government services, you are opening a door for everyone to be able to engage with government services, because sometimes within the community of people with disabilities, we are talking about people are not able to leave their home. No, the only way that they have to engage is to online, or could be to email or access a website. And if that technology is not available for them, they'll be ignored, and we are basically in the path of exclusion. So the value in this case, is about creating value and creating a more inclusive society for citizens.
And Antonio, do you think leaders are aware of that strategic value of the likes of accessibility when it comes to digital transformation?
Many are, and I can give you an example of the Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, who has a son with a disability, and that really changed the way how we approach to those groups within Microsoft, as creating inclusion by default in some of the products that they create. So that can really make a difference. We've seen banks in the UK like the Barclays, where from the moment that they started to develop solutions for individuals with disabilities, families of those members, they were also opening bank accounts in the bank. So we've seen Caroline Casey in Ireland with Valuable 500 opening a conversation at Davos, and then you have Richard Branson and other leaders signing to be on Valuable 500. So I believe this is something that is starting to be better understood, and I think it's one of the areas that it will definitely grow and be more recognized as something important in terms of our companies going forward, in order to create a more inclusive society and organization. Because in the end, when we build products at Atos, or when we support our customers, we want to make sure that whatever we do, it can be done in a way that supports everyone and reflects the needs of society, of the people that we serve.
Yeah, thanks, Antonio. Claire, it's very interesting, because I've also heard you speak in the past about the transformation within Microsoft, especially from product to service. And I know we were working with a number of the employees in Microsoft at the time in terms of mentoring them on IMI, Irish Management Institute programs, and so on. And also we were working with resellers at the time, and it was an incredibly tough period for everyone concerned. Do you want to tell us a bit about how you made that transition? How obviously it was very difficult. What were the key elements to that strategy of moving Microsoft maybe from a product perspective to that service perspective?
Yeah, it was an interesting journey for Microsoft, and I don't think they're finished on that journey, but they have been navigating the terrain, I think, very well, and they've done incredibly well so far. It definitely started with the change of strategy and direction, and I suppose little bit back to what both Antonio and Julianne were saying, you know, there was a little bit on the values in terms of what they wanted to do as a company, but then there was a little bit on the value that they're creating and where was that value. And I think what they saw was that there was a kind of a reducing value in kind of selling software licenses per person per head, because that was just kind of a commodity now, and they were moving into this idea of creating a platform with services, as you know, software as a service, and saw that, and that whole value discussion completely changed how the whole organization operated. And it started at the heart of Microsoft. I mean, Microsoft at its heart is a developer organization. So, you know, the transformation happened there first, actually, in terms of how the developers were building the products and services. And it kind of preceded the transformation of the rest of the company. And actually, more recently, actually, if you hear a lot about what they're talking about collaboration and breaking down silos, and, you know, breaking through this idea of, you know, each little silo kind of, I don't know if anyone saw that classic organizational structure photo of Microsoft where they had all the little divisions and they were all pointing guns at each other, because that's what the way they were all very competitive, and they had to break that down to move towards a more collaborative organization where everyone worked together. That was core to their transformation from a developer perspective. And, you know, even their embracing of things like open source has been a huge shift in mindset and culture, as well as behaviors within the organization. And then it came to this idea of how we all operate in the sales and marketing organization, the field organization, as they called it, and with our partners. And it was, I mean, it was a huge shift, because they literally had the old school of products that they sold, you know, license wise, and then they moved to this idea of software as a service. The entire business model shifted in terms of, you know, before we got the money up front and kind of like didn't really care if people used it or not. And then we moved to a world at that time where we were being paid by the month, and you very much cared if people were using it or not, because if they weren't using it, you wouldn't be paid next month. So, you know, people could shut off the service. And, you know, what's interesting about that is that the technology, cloud platform, allowed for that shift in terms of how they offered their service. But it was the business model, I think, that was the biggest transformation for the field and for the engineering organization and for our partners and resellers and things like that, because it was just a different thing we were selling with a different value proposition. Before it was just a license, you could use it if you wanted to, you knew you had it. But now it was an actual service that people really cared how you adopt it. And so I think that's part of why the whole conversation shifted in Microsoft, and in fact in the industry, from this idea of sales that was just, you know, that was the end point, to this idea of customer success and adoption being the key to digital transformation. Because if people aren't using what you build, then what's the point? And I think that this for me has been a core shift in the whole tech industry. That, you know, there used to be this, like, we get it out the door and that's our job finished. You know, I mean, you'd be lucky if they got to testing, you know, in the olden days, you know, that the whole conversation was the handover to testing before you hand it out the door. But now it's like, it's all so much about how people are using it. Are they finding it easy to use? Can they use it at all? To Antonia's point about, you know, accessibility. And in that discussion, value and the value you're measuring is completely different than the number of lines of code you have. Like it's just completely different mindset of things you have to measure in that context. And
I think, Claire, you clearly differentiated earlier, and I think it's a great differentiation between values and value. Now, I'm being a bit cynical here, and I'm saying it was really driven by necessity in Microsoft. They could see the writing on the wall. It wasn't necessarily driven by values. Now, I'm saying that to be provocative.
Yeah, but like, I mean, to be honest, there was necessity all along Microsoft's history where they didn't change their values and nothing happened, and they lost the phone market and they lost this, that, the other. So it wasn't like, it's not like necessity didn't raise its head before, but it was when they changed their values about how they collaborate and what they wanted to provide to customers. When they changed those, that was when they could actually capitalize on the value that they could bring. And until they changed how they went about things and the, you know, embracing things like growth mindset and even trying to change. Like, I mean, there was a time when you wouldn't get anyone in Microsoft to ever say that they were wrong about anything, right? Because that was the kind of like, you know, we know best kind of culture. And until they changed those and started appreciating different values, it was only then that they could actually unleash the value that to new customers and partners and all the rest of it, because otherwise they would have been locked in their own, in the constraints of their own making, which was this dependency on, ownership and competitiveness and, market domination. And it was kind of like, we can't win, we don't play, and all this kind of thing. And then they moved to this much more open approach, and it was a big shift. And if they hadn't have done that, I don't think they would be where they are today.
Mm. Yeah.
There, can I ask,
Rob,
just out of interest, what, for that to happen, would take quite a big shift from a growth mindset perspective from the leadership element, right? Because you would imagine further down the organization there might be that openness to change because they're willing to look at things a little. But at the very top, what were some of the approaches, training, tools, techniques, coaching, I would imagine, were done to make them more aware and make them want to change?
Yeah, I mean, it was all of the above, I'd say. So, I mean, we all got a copy of the book, Growth Mindset, but I always laugh at that and kind of go, so some people kind of thought that was it, you got a copy of the book, you read the book, you're done, but it wasn't. And there was a big shift, like Microsoft ran a tight ship in terms of actually matching incentives and how they actually helped people understand what they were expecting of them in terms of their, compensation structures and all the rest of it. That went through a big change. So there was a big shift towards this idea of, instead of being rewarded just by results, no matter how you got there, there was a big focus towards actually calling out collaborative behaviors, like how you would actually leverage other people's work and how other people leveraged your work. And they were like, between that and results, they were the three pillars of how you were being rewarded. Now that completely changed how people thought about things, because suddenly it wasn't just about getting the number, and no matter how you did it and who you killed on the way. Suddenly it was about, well, actually now I care about, number one, I care about how I leverage other people's work, but more importantly, I care that other people leverage my work. Now that's that means it's not just throwing it over the wall, like, and sharing best practice and kind of go, well, I put it out there, but you actually have to work with other people to see how you can work better together. Now, that was a big shift in terms of actually shifting collaboration. And that was one of the biggest ways I think they did it. But they supplemented that with significant, training for managers and this move to a coaching kind of approach. It was my first experience of being coached was within Microsoft. And as I was so taken with the whole process that the first thing I did when I left was actually going on a coaching diploma, because I fundamentally believe that coaching as an approach for everyone, by the way, not just for managers and leaders. I think everyone should be doing coaching qualifications, because it's the science of change, and I think everyone should at least read a book on it.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point, Claire. But I'd like to ask Rob, to what extent can you coach values into someone? Don't values come from within you? Can you coach values into someone?
I think what you coach is the awareness of the values. So, like, you might not be aware of the 5 or 6 core values that you live your life by, you make your decisions by. They're there, but we just have to get you to change the seating and look at it, look at yourself from a different perspective and unearth them. And there's a process for that. There's lots of different tools and techniques, but it's trying to find out what those are. A lot of the time in coaching, I would ask somebody to say, if you don't know what your values are, ask your partner or ask, somebody close to you, and they might just throw them back at you very quickly, and you'll realize. But once you start to realize those, you can then start using them as a decision-making tool to say, right, is this company the one I want to work for? Like you mentioned, Claire, and I think the key piece you said is almost ties to intrinsic and extrinsic motivations, right? So when people are motivated to sell at all costs, that's the culture that will evolve. But when there's an intrinsic motivation that they want to do good because it's going to help somebody else in the team, or maybe somebody gives them a shout out to say, you did a really good job last week, that builds that intrinsic motivation. So it kind of gets them going. But back to your question, Paidi, I think they're in there. They just need to be coached out, not to change, because it might be coached out. I remember when I got my first coaching experience at the time I was in EMC going for a promotion. And my boss at the time, who was going through coaching diploma as well, he mentioned, and I think it was the coach mentioned as well, a good percentage of people, when they go down a coaching engagement with an external coach, end up realizing they want to leave the organization because it's just not in line with who they are and what they stand for. And any organization that is willing to, give your future leaders that coaching, knowing that can happen, is a pretty good organization in my book. and then you find your values, you might realize, well, I'm well aligned to what this company is all about. This is for me, or not. So I think the coaching element will pull back the layers of who you are, figure out who you are, get to know yourself better. And if the person is willing to do that work, because again, that is very important, you have to want to change to figure out who they are. It can be the most transformative piece of work you'll ever do,
Yeah, and it's a great point, Rob. So it's very interesting that maybe the change in Microsoft came from a new leader coming in who obviously espoused maybe certain values, and those values then were maybe started to appear in maybe in the manifestation of a strategy. Some people felt it didn't fit in, maybe left, others blossomed within it. So probably the introduction of leadership is another way maybe you can go about value-driven transformation.
Just one point, Paddy, just while I see a question, there's a comment on bonus systems driving change. The research shows, if you look at the last four generations, be it the baby boomers, X, millennials, and Z, and look at what their kind of motivations are, and you would say work-life balance for millennials, but it's looking like the new generation are very similar to baby boomers in some ways, in that they're motivated by security, privacy, financial stability, because they were growing up around the time of 2008 crisis, and it impacts them. So I don't think bonus systems will target certain generations, and others it may not be the number one driver for what what their value system aligns to.
Yeah. Guys, I always say that we need to give people takeaways from these conversations. It's very interesting that the values-driven digital transformation has come to the head here. But in terms of, and I'll go to Julianne, so if we're to give them a shopping list, these are the things you nearly need to do if you're to be successful at digital transformation. Is there one or two things you'd put at top of the list, Julianne, in terms of advice to people listening here?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose the number one thing is maybe focus less on the word digital and start with the word transformation, as Claire herself said earlier as well. And think about the vision, set the vision first. What is it you're trying to do? Why are you trying to do it? Who are you trying to do it for? And after that, then how will you do it? Because unless you really contemplate the kind of the why and the who and those questions, you're not going to discover the right how you're going to do it, right? So the first thing, set the vision really, and then in really practical terms, I would say start small. Don't try to change the world immediately. Set yourself a reasonable expectation. Set yourself a small project or something you can deliver as a kind of a way of showing that this will work. This is something worth pursuing, or showing that it won't work. That's the other thing. I mean, be prepared to fail, be prepared for false starts, be prepared for all those things, because you just have to get into that kind of experimental mindset for something for things like that to really make a difference, and for transformation to actually happen. And really importantly then as well is give yourself the space to do it. So it's hard to do that in a lot of organizations that we work in. You need to be supported from the top, absolutely. You have to be, you have to have the space in terms of, the resources, the understanding that this is something we're going to try, we're going to do, and, the physical space. But more than that, what kind of comes with that, the psychological space that this is okay, we're going to try this, it may work, it may not work, but we're going to do it, and we're going to commit to it for a certain amount of time and learn from what happens. So, start small to minimize the risk, to embed the idea that if it's good, we can replicate it. I mean, I guess that's the other thing to consider as well is, can you scale up what you learn? Is there going to be a way to make this more bigger or more meaningful across your organization? All of those things really, I think, are important, but never underestimate the power of going back to those 6 honest serving men. They were relevant a long time ago, and they're more relevant than ever now, I think, when it comes to transformation of any kind.
Yeah, so some really interesting points, just maybe to paraphrase some of them, Julianne. It's having a very clear sense of a vision. Where are you trying to go? You know, why are you trying to go there? Who can you go there with? What you need to get there? And as you say, the 6 honest serving men, but also maybe having an environment where you can try things maybe on a pilot basis before you scale them up, and that you're given maybe the space to do that, the backing, the leadership backing. Antonio, if we go over to you, what would be top of your shopping list for folks listening here in terms of digital transformation going forward, post-crisis?
Post-crisis, I think it's there are a few discussions over the last couple of weeks on the topic of facial recognition, and some companies pulling out of some of those projects. I think going forward, it's particularly important to you pay more attention to the way how you build teams, the way how you bring people together from different types of expertise. You cannot just have a group of developers and project managers running a project on facial recognition without sociologists and psychologists. So you need to find ways where you are able to do a better job in the way how you manage teams, and how you find ways to improve the diversity of the teams working in different projects. It's not today in many areas that we work that has a huge impact in society. It's no longer possible to create solutions without looking at areas of social sciences like sociology, anthropology, and psychology. It's basically not impossible. It's not possible, because it's not part of the core skills of the engineers, it's not part of the core skills of developers. So you really need to start to considering this set of skills in everything that you try to build, if you want to have a positive impact in the area of digital transformation. And one of the things that we look at something in a very interesting way is how you produce green code. So how you make sure that your code, the things that you do, are done in a way that they are sustainable. So when you are putting together 5G, when you are putting together solutions that have for your customer, how green is your code, how much energy that code is going to use. No, the element of sustainability is particularly important, moving forward, as the way how you are able to bring diverse teams together. Those things for me are particularly critical and important at the moment.
Okay, so some really nice points to add to Julianne's then. So Antonio is saying, from a delivery point of view, we have to be very careful about the makeup of these delivery teams, the teams that are delivering digital transformation. And in particular, I suppose the diversity of those teams, there's a real danger, and I'm saying this rather than Antonio, though, the danger of that the majority of apps and systems built are for, pale male stale, the 35 to the 45-year-old pale male developer, and that we need to move beyond that. Also that there's big ethical implications of that we've these algorithms learning from past behaviors, but also learning from coded behavior, which are really just propagating issues that are already there, ethical issues, so on, so forth. So really, really nice shopping list. Claire, do you want to add to our shopping list?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I suppose, to build on both what Julianne and Antonio has said, all of which is very valid. For me, it really is about kind of building these competencies within an organization that will help with everything, with deciding what you do and how you do it. And I think the area for me that's most important around this is collaboration. It's this idea as well of moving from this, everything is fixed, to being open to change. And part of that is being open in terms of who you talk to and expanding your network and breaking down silos from these teams that have grown up over the years with, single function, single viewpoint, to be more open around having cross-disciplinary participants, which actually helps in loads of diversity kind of scenarios. Thinking about how you reach out beyond your organization, beyond, to actually collaborate with different groups and different organizations to help you advance. So this idea of being open and transparent and being comfortable with that, and being comfortable with things like experimentation and failure, which we're not, right? So it's all, for me, the fabric of this is kind of trust, actually. And I think there's an awful lot of, if I had to think about one thing that people should measure and value that perhaps they don't, it's this idea of trust being a fabric of your organization, so that you can all work together better, and there's psychological safety, and you know, your customers can trust you, and your partners can trust you, and everywhere there's trust, because if that happens, then digital transformation would be a lot smoother. But I don't know if that's a priority right now, and perhaps it should be.
Yeah, so really, really cool, because some would say that, I suppose, whether it causes or it's the result of silos is lack of trust, you know, and those boundaries become very, very, I suppose, hard, difficult to cross as a result. Claire, if you don't mind, because again, I'm very interested sort of in the open movement. What do you think we can learn from the open movement when it comes to digital transformation going forward? So obviously the open movement is based on, you know, collaboration and team effort produces better result than individuals, sort of. So what can we learn from the open movement?
Well, I think, you know, like looking at the open source developers that I would know of versus perhaps folks that have grown up in a more proprietary environment, like collaboration's at the heart of open source development. And if you hear anyone talk about how to do that, how to do open source development, the vast majority of their conversation is around building community. How do you engender trust? How do you motivate people intrinsically as well as, you know, potentially extrinsically? But there's an awful lot around the psychology and the organizational behaviors. That's where their focus is. They've kind of got there earlier than people who are focused on, you know, technically being brilliant or architectural brilliance, like everything's a Sudoku puzzle to solve. There's one solution. Whereas I think folks in the open area are much more focused on creating community, and that being the sustainability that they build into their projects is the health of the community. So I think they're further along that conversation. And I think, you know, when you think about something like inner source, which is taking those methodologies and applying them internally in organizations, that is all about how do you do collaboration? How do you do it in a sustainable way? How do you do it so that it's not dependent on people being in the same room together? Where there's a record of exactly how decisions were made and why they were made, and where there's transparency across silos, so people can collaborate and improve each other's code in a way that that doesn't mean that everything is concentrated. All the decisions and responsibility for ethics, for example, are concentrated in a small group of people who may not be the right people. So for me, all of that whole movement towards openness, which you're starting to see now move from being just enthusiast-led to actually being at the core of some of the larger corporate organizations, like even financial service organizations, which I would never have thought to see in my lifetime. But you know, they're all open sourcing things, and they're beginning to realize that the behavioral change that you get from participating in those kind of communities, open communities, can be far more valuable than building than IP, actually. And I think that, you know, that's a really interesting conversation when we think about value, that perhaps you know, innovation and digital transformation comes faster and better, which is what you actually want if you're open about it, rather than if you're closing and trying to protect and, you know, hold everything to yourself.
And I think it's interesting because it ties in with Antonia's point as well. Open source tends to be very diverse groups of people that do it for intrinsic reasons, not necessarily there's no financial rewards. They're doing it because of this, and to tie back into Julianne's point, a value, a vision. They want to be part of a value or a vision, and they're happy to collaborate then on that basis. Rob, have you anything you can add to our shopping list for the future of digital transformation, how we should go about it?
I'll build on a couple of points, just on Julianne's point where you're looking at vision, and absolutely buy into that. I think the key point as you kind of go on that journey, we've all probably been on IT journeys where values were set, lip service was very obvious that we were going on an agile transformation, and then it stops 6 months later, the next buzzword comes in. When you have people at all levels of the organization involved in putting together those values and putting that program together, you need to give those people at different levels the ownership to make that stick, and then you can measure it over a period of time. So identifying kind of champions in different parts of the organization that will like live that value, and it's, I've heard somebody mention recently that humans are like dolphins and whales, that were the three species that imitate what other do. So if you see somebody portraying these values, living these values, the people around you will start taking them on board. So being able to do that at the lower level and kind of carry that through is important. And to Claire's point, trust was the word I had written down here. In the new world, in this remote working world, when things settle down and maybe people start trying to find a more work-life balance, maybe not working crazy hours just to prove that they're still working, it comes into absolutely tying trust into everything to do. Leaders, managers who can't see their employees anymore have to trust, rather than have monitoring software to see how many clicks of a keyboard is happening or activity of a mouse. I think that's massively important. And measuring people on output as opposed to the hours they worked in the day. So if you could create a report or write whatever number of lines of code is your in a day or in a few hours, that's what your output is, and that's where the value is, as opposed to putting in the extra hours and the hero mentality, I think.
Yeah, so it's interesting the way we're coming together as a group, So so I'm not sure, was that planned or is it
I
just
did that on purpose at the end there, Paddy.
Yeah. So actually, I suppose takeaways for me from what we're saying is that really successful digital transformation needs to be vision and values driven. Your means then of delivering it has to be really based on trust and maybe that safety of working in an environment. And ideally, we need to even look at that openness concept, which is fascinating. So, and just keep an eye on the clock here, guys, because I could go on and on for hours here, but I know maybe there's other poor folks have to go back to work or dinner or whatever else. I want to just ask the question, what do you think is coming next in terms of the transformation? Now, whether that's the transformation of business models or the transformation of operations or the transformation of maybe customer experiences, any ideas where you think we're going to be in 6, 12, 24 months' time? Maybe I'll start with Antonio there.
No, I was adding part of that to my shopping list because I see them as a must. I see a lot of trying to look at sustainability and decarbonization as a main topic. In our case, how can we do that ourselves? How can we help our customers? How can we use the results of some of the work that we have been doing in the last couple of years to make the case for that? Because we have a large amount of our workforce working from home, and that led us to lead the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. So how can we? So I see that as one of the areas where everyone is going to focus on, and the other is particularly on ecosystems for cybersecurity. There are a few organizations already trying to bring partners and customers together and creating a space where everyone collaborates, even if sometimes they are competitors. But the idea goes back to trust. So creating spaces where organizations can collaborate and trying to find the best practice on cybersecurity to support everyone's needs, because it's basically things are getting worse. There are cities under attack in different parts of the world. The Australian government was under attack just a few days ago. So it's particularly important to foster ecosystems in key areas. So cybersecurity and sustainability are two of the ones that I see as mainstream.
Yeah, so I suppose that thankfully now, Antoine, there's a lot of maybe a lot of the narrative out there is that doing good is good, but doing good is good business now, and sustainability and environmental concerns and all those things are becoming more front and central. And I think you're also right to know that the only way of tackling some of these bigger issues is through collaborations, through ecosystems, through networks, etc. And I don't think we'll ever be able to tackle those problems without going through that step. Julianne, anything for you that's going to come next, or whether it's public services or anything else? Where do you think we're going to be in 6, 12, 24 months' time?
I think, to be honest, we're probably going to have to start kind of, again, rather like what Claire is saying, it's the sort of skill sets. We're going to have to start honing our skills very differently and maybe broadening our skills to enable us to meet the challenges that are ahead, because honestly we really probably don't know what's ahead. We have to be adaptable, we have to be agile, but also we have to be a bit more, probably we have to be a bit more creative and imaginative. Like in many ways, those aspects and elements of our personalities are things that we'll have to hone. There's huge advantages coming in technology, you know, all these advanced robotics and AI and all of that stuff. That's fine, but there are definitely, there's not enough emphasis yet, I think, on those complementary, really human skills that are going to be necessary in order for us to be adaptable and to meet the challenges of whatever is coming down the line in the future for us. So it'll be very important for us to hone those skills and instincts alongside whatever it is we're doing in technology. And really, from the point of view of Cork County Council as a local authority, I think we've really set an important mindset change has happened for us in the last couple of years, and it's happened because we've really started looking and reflecting on what it is that is important to us as an organisation, but what's also important out there to the people of the county, to the citizens that we work with. And more than anything, I guess we're going to stop doing things for people and start doing things with people, which is really going to be critical to how we're going to work in the next while. Just once again, coming back to, I have to leave this quote out there as well. There's a brilliant guy, Cormac Russell, and he's a real advocate of asset-based community development, which is really all about enabling people to help themselves and really looking at the resources and assets that are out there in communities and helping people build on those. And one of the great things he has is that change happens at the speed of trust. And I think that is exactly a message, I suppose, for us to take away from some of the conversation that we've had here today as well.
Yeah, so some lovely points there again. So Julianne, I suppose in terms, it's very interesting that you referred to that, nearly even the team model we call it, where we need more nearly generalists, or at least we need teams that have more diversity, if we borrow some of the terms before, whether that's psychologists or sociologists or whatever else, they're vital. It isn't just technologists driving these agendas, that we complement their skills with other skills. And also I love the idea that very often the most effective forms of innovation is where you empower people. You don't just give them the solutions, you empower them to actually work on their own solutions. Rob?
Yeah, just to add on to what I think, kind of thinking a lot about the CIOs of the future, right? So I would imagine the next few years a percentage of CIOs are going to be millennials, so they're going to have to change how organizations, or they're going to drive it a lot harder, right, because of the value set that they have. This idea of high IQ, high emotional intelligence, I think adaptability, and AI, I'm calling it an adaptive intelligence, social intelligence, generational intelligence. A leader needs to be even more 360, looking at all these environmental factors that are coming at them, not just technology, but political, generational, dealing and leading with all of those things. And the leader will continue to need to get to know themselves better and figure out how they can control all of that. I think that's going to be big. The 4-day work week is something I'm thinking about as well, how organizations are going to have to adapt to that, because we've adapted in 2 weeks to working from home. So this might bubble up on the agenda again in the near future. And finally, what I'm looking at as well around the D&I space is neurodiversity and a strategy around that, because from the statistics I've unearthed, something like 70% of autistic adults that are able to work, want to work, but are unemployed. And I think there's a big gap potentially there. So how IT CIOs work with HR to identify, attract and retain, develop that talent would be big, I think, as well.
Yeah. So some great, again, takeaways from that. We got the idea of adaptability, people being able to adapt to one another, but also adapt to maybe changes in the environment. We got that generational intelligence, being able to work with other generations. We've a massive number of generations within some workforces now, which we never had maybe before. So I think, Claire, I left you last this time, I think. So anything to add to our list, Claire, in terms of what's coming next?
Already. Yeah, and I suppose I would concur with all of that. And then maybe to add on that this is all about, you know, we might see new measures come true. I mean, we were talking earlier about the idea of return on investment. You know, if return on investment equals a big dollar sign somewhere in your spreadsheet, maybe that's not the only thing to be measuring. And I do think that in the context of everything we've talked about here, I think there will be new measures that actually emerge, and ways of measuring those within the organization, like the idea of community health, if you've got a developer community going, or like the idea of collaboration or trust. I think we need to look at that sort of thing. And, you know, there are some interesting projects in the open source community around measuring that idea of community health and things like that, but maybe some of those can be adapted from an organizational, from a more business perspective as well. I also believe that more cross-disciplinary teams are going to happen. You can see that already. Like I've been to God knows how many technology conferences in the last 2 years, and I can tell you that the vast majority of topics there are all about psychology and organizational behavior. I don't think they've quite gotten to inviting organizational behavior people there yet, and psychologists, maybe they absolutely should. But you can see that there's a move towards broadening people's perspective in terms of what the discipline of things like software and technology means. And I think that that's going to definitely happen. And then to Antonio's point, it's probably broader even than the organization, into ecosystem collaboration. For me, there is so much opportunity out there when we think about digital transformation that no one organization can do it alone. And I think we're going to see far more ecosystem groups appear, where people with similar problems are going to get together to solve them. And I think we have to do that, even to solve the cyber issues, the sustainability issues, everything. To get the most out of all of this, we need to go beyond our organizational borders. And for me, that's probably a trend that's going to start happening more and more.
Yeah, and I think each of us picked nearly that up, which is very interesting. So the more diverse teams, you know, that are delivering, but also more inclusive consideration. And I love the idea of value. What is value? That we need to revisit the concept of value, the value that we're trying to create through digital transformation. That maybe we need to move somewhat away from that bottom line, that dollar figure, as you say, Clare, you know, and I've no doubt, is there a stat, something like, is it 75% of the workforce by the year 2025 will be millennials, you know, who have a very different sense of what value is, you know, to maybe my generation or even generations before. So I think fantastic insights. Actually, there's a great book in it, you know, because I've been writing away here. So
when do we expect it?
Well, it won't be my book. It'll be
maybe a collaborative endeavor.
That's right. Yeah. Okay, guys. So I'm just keeping an eye on the clock here. We're just 23 minutes past a fascinating conversation. I know it's a conversation we could have kept on going for ages more. I just like, I don't know, is Antonio here just to give us some insight on maybe future events that are not, sorry, Antonio, Tony, in terms of events that are coming up for the digital transformation lab.
Yeah, I'm here, Paidi. Good afternoon, everyone. Firstly, congratulations, great session. So thank you, Paidi, Clare, Julianne, Antonio, and Rob, and Eleanor for the opening words. It is a great platform for which to start the Digital Transformation Lab. As Paidi said, we are a group of interested stakeholders spanning industry, consulting, academia, and our plan is to make sure that there is genuine sharing and exploration of what does it mean to digitally transform firms. I think our conversation today has just shown that it's such a huge subject, and out in the marketplace, you know, just people are not sure what digital transformation means because it's not defined, and each organization in its own silos is trying to define it for themselves. So we want to share through our platform. There's a number of people on the committee. It's led by Dr. Paidi Oreilly himself. Antonio Santos, who's on the panel, is also a member. Jeremy Hayes, Gronya Bagnall, Ken Russell, and myself. And the plan is to expand that steering committee short term. We started today, we thought would be a good topic, you know, digital transformation, what next? But we do plan to cover a range of other subjects. As Paidi said, this is the start of a 6-part series. So we're going to get much deeper into, you know, the whole people side of digital transformation. And I think that came through in spades today, that actually transformation, it's around your people, it's around your culture, not necessarily the technology. We're going to look at digital mindsets. We're going to look at the link between digital transformation and sustainability. We will also look at digital platforms, ecosystems, and all those type of things, including cybersecurity. And we do plan to have a session on why digital transformation fails and what organizations can do to deal with that and make sure they are successful. So we do have an online community on LinkedIn. It's in the chat there. We'd encourage you all to join it, and we look forward to having many more events. Thank you.
Okay, and I can see Eleanor back in the room there. The camera's back on, so she's probably not expecting this, but I don't know, did you want to say a final word or two, Eleanor, from the point of view of Cubs?
I just want to say it was absolutely fantastic. I have a personal interest in, like, I'm an economist, but my version of economics goes all the way back to the moral sentiments of Adam Smith, and arguably you need to look at that stuff before you look at any of the modern versions of how that is part and parcel of what it means to actually develop. Is individual development is actually helped by the development of an economy, and there's lots of stories there. The whole notion of transformation, again, a space that I'm hugely interested in terms of personal transformations, and even there I think we could keep going for another couple of hours on how we would define trust and how it would mean for, you know, trust within your group, how it means different things to different people. I have teenagers in my house, and I know trust for them is maintaining the respect of their peer group no matter what. Be wrong in the group rather than be right by yourself. So that for me says an awful lot about how people approach, whether it's trust or any other theme we think about. There's that, you know, group think that can give you meaning and value in a way that, you know, the right way of doing something may not. So there's all that going on. So I just found it absolutely fascinating, really interesting. And to be honest, I'm looking forward to listening in on the future sessions as well. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Eleanor. So we're bang on time, guys, and I just want to say a special, I really mean this, thank you to the speakers we've here today. I know all the speakers in maybe in different ways, and I know they very much live that idea of sharing, and they're very generous with their time and always have been. And I just look forward to maybe us being able to nurture that maybe going forward. So I'd like to say a really sincere thanks to Claire, Julianne, Antonio, Rob. You know, you've been very decent with your time, and I know you always have been as well, which this isn't an exception. I also like to say just thanks to the background team, though, in terms of the digital transformation lab, that put a lot of time and effort into maybe arranging the infrastructure for this. You know, it's easy for me to wade in here and wear a pink shirt and say and listen and whatever else, but there's a lot of work goes on in the background. I'd like to say thanks to the guys. Also, I think Eleanor previously mentioned, I just want to reiterate as well, there's also the likes of the media team in Cork University Business School, and others also in there that have supported this, and I look forward to going forward with the other events, which will run monthly as we go forward. So we'll stay in touch with those that have attended this event, and we'll let you know about the future events. Also, I love the idea of seeing kids as we go along, because that is the future. I think if we're working at home, then it's going to be a blended approach, and I think it actually adds to the whole sense of reality of what the future is going to look like. So there's been great comments coming in. I picked up as many as I could in terms of the questions I was asking. I mightn't have called them out directly, but I know maybe things like, you know, the ethics and all that I had built into the questions. Also, any of the panelists wish to share the link to their LinkedIn profile or anything else that people can contact them. I'll leave this running for another 5 minutes at least. So feel free, if you want to put up, as I say, that link to your LinkedIn profile or whatever else you want to share, feel free to do it so that people can contact you. As I say, we've also recorded this, and hopefully we'll be able to cut it up into interesting tidbits for people in the future to be able to watch back. So I think it's bang on half past. I couldn't have managed it better, and I managed it with my eyes closed, because I don't know how we ended up right on the money. So I'd like to say a final farewell. Thank you to everyone on the panel and to those that have tuned in today, and we look